Welcome to the Edinburgh Lothians and Borders Archaeology Conference. It's fantastic to see you all here today. Thank you very much for coming. Well, I'd like to thank our supporters this morning, so that's AOC Archaeology Group and Guard Archaeology, as well as Historic Environment Scotland for their continuing support of this conference. It's a pleasure to be back here at Queen Margaret University again today. They've been hosting us for many years now, and they've been behind the scenes doing all the hard work getting things set up for us today. You might notice that there is a camera here in the corner, so we are filming the conference, and in a few weeks we'll put this online on the John Gray Centre website. Just a little bit about how things are going to work today. So rather than having questions after every talk, we're going to save up the questions for the discussion times. So after the first three speakers, we'll ask the speakers to come back to the front, and you can ask any of them questions at that time. So just save up your questions for the discussion. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Jamie Humble from AOC Archaeology Group, who's going to be talking about the Holyrood Archaeology project.
Hi there. Thank you for coming to let me talk at this and to give us the opportunity to talk about our work at Dunsapie. This has not just been AOC Archaeology, it's been a collaborative project between HES, the University of Edinburgh and AOC. And what I'll give you a brief run through of today is I'll start with something about the archaeology of the park within Holyrood Park, then we'll go on to why we're doing the project and what we've done on Dunsapie so far and in the wider park. So everyone will probably know Holyrood Park. You see it as you're driving in. Well, I see it as I drive into the office every day, usually reminding me what I've not done for this project. You quite often can't really get away from it, you know. But it dominates the skyline of the city. It's a special place for animal and plant life, its geology, its cultural value, and also its archaeological sites and monuments. The whole park is a scheduled monument, and it's all a site of special scientific interest. The park's visited by thousands of people each year, and it's an important place for the people of Edinburgh and tourists around. The park's home to the remains of earlier landscapes stretching back over at least the last 2,000 years, from 20th century rifle ranges and 18th and 19th century quarries, to rig and cultivation terraces and the walls of prehistoric forts and settlements. The earliest evidence in the park of the use of the landscape is Mesolithic and Neolithic find spots of kind of flints and small stone tools. And then we get on to the kind of Bronze Age hoards, especially like the Duddingston hoard, as everyone will probably be aware of. However, the earliest upstanding archaeology are the 4 hill forts within the park, which we'll come back to later. And then alongside these, there's cultivation terraces and enclosures, of which many are post-medieval, but some may have kind of prehistoric origins, especially the cultivation terraces. And as I briefly mentioned, there are quarries, rifle ranges, and troop training trenches, showing the use of the site through the medieval, post-medieval, and into the modern period. So the Holyrood Field School, the Holyrood Archaeology Project, was set up in 2021 due to this wealth of archaeology within the park. But despite this, despite the incredible archaeological resource, there's been very little work done on the park. So we wanted to kind of counteract that, as well as kind of try to start to analyse any of the kind of threats to the survival of the archaeology from the numbers of visitors, and maybe start to see what could be done about that, as well as providing training opportunities for the university students. So the first phase was to map the archaeology and the pressure that the high numbers of visitors are having on this. The first phase is a programme of survey. We did everything from simple plane table survey to laser scanning, photogrammetry, geophysical survey, as well as mapping the erosion and even some historic building recording. And this built on previous surveys by the Commission in the 90s and previous erosion surveys. The focus of this was quickly the 4 forts in Holyrood Park, one on Arthur's Seat or Crow Hill, Dunsapie, Salisbury Crags, and Sampson's Ribs. And these are of widely different character and size. But there's been hardly any investigation into any of the forts, with the only excavation being on the Crow Hill Arthur's Seat fort in the 1990s. And there's been no dating from any of these forts. So we know little about how they relate to each other or what they are used for. So alongside, just down from as well as highlighting the forts, I just wanted to highlight the cultivation terraces, as these are some of the most impressive monuments in the park on the east side of Crow Hill Arthur's Seat, between Arthur's Seat and Dunsapie, sorry. And these are some of the best preserved cultivation terraces in the south of Scotland. And these are one of the only places that have seen any kind of recent archaeological work. And they've been investigated by Richard Tipping and Tim Kinnaird to try and date them. And they've shown that these have prehistoric origins with continued use through to the post-medieval period. And Richard and Tim's work is something that we're trying to build on with this as well. And we've had them involved in the project and some of the other. And looking at some of the cultivation terraces that we have on Dunsapie, which I'll get back to. So this is Dunsapie Fort. This is the LiDAR view in our survey and our layout of the trenches. So if I just give you a quick run through of what we've got on the fort, we've got a kind of upper enclosure with a big rampart surrounding the top terrace of Dunsapie. In this top terrace, there's numerous little bedrock outcrops and hollows and wee terraces that are potential sites for settlement within the centre of this upper part of the fort. And then there's also at the very north, how do I do this? Is that? No. There's a small, a circular, slightly enigmatic feature that we're also keen to investigate. And then there's an outer rampart on the west side, as well as an annex on the east with a scoop settlement and what's likely a kind of later field boundary bank and areas of rig or cultivation terraces. And then, this side, you can kind of see, so we've put our trenches to try and investigate most of these features. Dunsapie's seen very little previous work. There's been a few kind of chance finds, chance and metal detecting. In the 1920s, there was this stone mould was found, but there's little information about its discovery. It was apparently found in some kitchen midden. It's unfortunately rather undiagnostic in date, could be anywhere Iron Age to early historic. And then there's some decorated bronze axes which were found by a metal detectorist, apparently buried in a bedrock cleft at the north of the fort. And these most likely predate the construction of the fort, being kind of early Bronze Age in date. And these were investigated by Trevor Cowie. So after that, if we now get on to what we did and what we found, I'll start at the south because one of the most important things we wanted to do was to kind of characterise the survival of the fort and survival of the archaeology of the fort. And this varied quite wildly across, depending where we are. So this is at the south, and you can see an arc of stones that's likely a stone-walled roundhouse butted up against the inner, the inner rampart of this upper enclosure. Most of this was visible on the surface as an arc of stones. But apart from that, it's very poorly preserved because apart from the stonework, it's all so shallow now that all the deposits have become homogenised and turned into, there was no differentiation between them. However, despite this, there's some kind of good survival with big shards of prehistoric pottery surviving tucked up in against the stonework of the walls. I'll carry on. If we contrast this with just about 20 metres or so away, you've got massively deep deposits of soil build-up across the fort. However, possibly less structural evidence. Within this trench, we've mainly just got build-up of midden deposits from within the fort, as well as we also partially excavated the rampart on this west side of the fort. And this is over 5 metres thick, constructed of stone with, well, fairly poorly kind of surviving, kind of facing stones on the inside. And on the outside, we can only see them on the surface. And that's how we know roughly how thick it is. And there's a possibility that there's an earthen bank just tucked inside this, which might be a different phase of the rampart, which we'll come back to later. And then at the other end of the trench, we've got these deep deposits of soil build-up, which contain a large amount of kind of domestic refuse, including large amounts of domestic midden-type material, such as bone, and in impressive quantities for a Scottish hill fort. Within this, there was a few more diagnostic artefacts of suggesting kind of Iron Age dates, such as stone balls and ceramics. And then this is where we're hoping will tie in with the previous work on the cultivation terraces, as we have a nice sequence of OSL dates to process through these columns. In fact, that's where they took them from, that hole. So if we now move on to the rampart on the east, we excavated this in 2 areas. We excavated this, as you can see in the wee red square, trenches 1 and further up, and 6, where we had a very similar sequence. We appear to have a primary rampart of earth and clay in fairly massive proportions. And then there's a hiatus in the kind of rampart. It seems to fall out of use. There's a soil build-up, and then there's a reconstruction in stone, but it's much slighter. You can see that's all that was remaining of the rampart, and it's quite narrow. And then within this, we have some nice well-stratified large pieces of bone that we extracted some radiocarbon dates from, and we'll come back to that in just a second. This is just more views of so this one here is the primary bank in earth and clay, with the outer facing of the kind of quite slight stone bank with soil build-up beneath it. These are the only carbon dates we've got so far. We're obviously going to do quite a lot more once we get fully into our post-excavation programme. But the takeaway is that we have probably initial rampart construction around 400 BC, with some internal occupation in a possible structure just inside the rampart, around, 200 to 400-ish, 100 to 400, and then a rebuilding around the 1st century BC AD. So that's the upper rampart. Oh. Yeah. Okay. The next place that this is dug was this. You can see the outer rampart on the west stretching across between these 2 rock outcrops. It doesn't appear to carry on further around to the south or to the north, but whether that's original or just an artefact of survival, I'm not sure yet. And it doesn't appear to join up with the upper rampart, so it's its own thing. Here we had an earth core with a probable outer stone face, although we only found that just in the kind of very edge of the trench. So whether we're just kind of coming up against more stone or it's actually an outer face, we're not entirely sure. There appears to be a sort of capping or stone construction. And then up in here we have terraced bedrock, possibly forming a kind of path or walkway at the immediate rear of the rampart. And then overlying that, because it's sitting on the steep slope, we've got lots of collapse from the ramparts above. Okay, that's the outer rampart. And then this is our investigation into that circular feature at the north of the site, which lies in a sort of commanding position with spectacular views across the Firth of Forth, across the Lothian plains and down to the Pentlands to the south. What appears from the LiDAR to be a ditch seems to just be a geological feature that's gradually filled with accumulated soil, again with large amounts of domestic midden material, lots of bone, very similar to as we saw in other areas with deep deposits. And then over this stone rubble appears to be a collapsed structure that we think was built on the bedrock outcrop above and then is entirely collapsed into the trench. When there's now nothing left in situ, it's only the collapse that's gone. But artefacts from this, such as quernstones, probably suggest that it's likely to be related to one phase of the hill fort. And then on the other side of the trench, we've got this slab-built structure. This is either foundations for a turf structure, or it could be some sort of path or walkway. Whatever it is, I think that it's likely to be late in the sequence of use on the hill fort. However, there's no real dating evidence for it. So it's all a bit of a mystery. There's been a lot of different suggestions for it, that it could be relating to when Albert did a lot of work in did a lot of work in the park, or it could be later kind of agricultural. But it's a bit of a mystery. Maybe if we went a bit further. If we scoot on now to down on the east, we also investigated the annex and a scooped settlement, which you can't really see on the LiDAR because I've got a big red block across it. The surface remains of this, you can see the big annex bank with an entrance on the east. This is overlain by enclosed terrace settlement with a roundhouse at the southern end and another possible roundhouse to the north. And then outside the annex bank, there's areas of rig and furrow, and there's also a bank kind of extending across the annex and up into the upper enclosure of the hill fort. And we wanted to investigate all of these. So the first thing to say is the annex bank which is the big bank, and in here, constructed of clay, very similar to the early upper rampart, rebuilt or refaced in stone, most likely related to when the scooped settlement was constructed. And what appears to be the entrance is a real entrance, as we found a metalled surface paving kind of trackway through it. And this appears to be rebuilt with the rebuilding of the enclosure bank. So at the north end of the fort, this scooped settlement, we have a roundhouse wall constructed on deep levelling deposits of glacial till, cut from the hill slope above to give a terrace, a stone-walled roundhouse, of which we only excavated a small portion of the interior, but we're possibly showing some rebuilding of it, suggesting kind of longevity to its use, as well as paving, and then paving around the kind of the outside, near the kind of inner face of the wall, more further towards the interior, more kind of eroded away, again possibly suggesting that it's quite long-lived. And then this lies within the enclosure bank, that's again stone built, and then this comes down under the spoil heap and out in around there, and just to north of where this photo is taken, that's where the annex bank comes round. So it comes up and it overlies it and then starts to reuse the annex bank. And then at the far right of the trench, we have this boundary bank that cuts up through the annex and into the upper enclosure of the hill fort. is just a few of the nicer artefacts from this scoop settlement. A copper alley fitting or bangle and a possible stone lamp or mortar. If we go on now to the hill fort the hill continues to be used after the hill fort's fallen out of use. We have cultivation terraces that you can see there sitting outside the annex. And we wanted to explore these to tie in with the work that's been done on the other side on the lower slopes of Crow Hill, Arthur's Seat, and done by Richard and Tim. As well as these cultivation terraces, we've got this boundary bank, which nicely found a bit of clay pipe stem underneath, showing that it's definitely kind of post-medieval. We also have, as I've touched on, the slab structure in Trench 5, and there was a small pen, probably relating to agriculture use in Trench 1. This is also sort of just showing that after the hill fort's gone out of use, there's quite a lot of agricultural use of the site. And then over the top of that, we also found scatterings of rifle cases from the kind of the troop training that happened in the area in the kind of early 1900s and sort of around World War I. And just to the north of the site, there's some training trenches. Can you see them? You can't quite see them on this trench. So just to sum everything, up, we've got a multi-phase enclosure starting with kind of early Bronze Age activity with rampart construction around 400 BC and then again around 100 BC AD. And then we've got a later Iron Age scoop settlement, medieval to post-medieval cultivation, a post-medieval bank. There's a few things that we still have to resolve. We still have to resolve the relationship of the annex to the fort, what the activity focus is in each phase, and the function of the fort. The vulnerability of the fort, where there's deeper stratigraphy than we might have expected. However, the shallow archaeology is still at risk, and these threats come from metal detectorists. We found numerous metal detectorist holes when we were doing the work, and just the sheer number of visitors and the footfall. And then, so there's research potential for the activity from the early Bronze Age, the medieval and later, and this is possibly kind of pulsed activity with late Iron Age downscaling. The bone preservation is good for the site, and hopefully we can do some dating and understanding the cultivation. All that's left is for me to thank everyone, the Historic Environment Scotland, and especially the Holyrood Park Rangers, the University of Edinburgh, all the students. I think we've now had over 80 across the 3 years, all the numerous visitors to the site, and everyone for listening to me talk. Thank you very much.